As the aircraft prepared for takeoff, 4 armed Palestinian militants from, once again, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine stormed the plane, opening fire at close range. The attack unfolded in seconds. Crew members were hit. One would later die from his wounds. The aircraft itself was riddled with bullets, left badly damaged on the tarmac. What would have become a mass casualty hijacking or mid-air destruction was unfolding in full view until it was stopped. Welcome to Threat Level Red. I'm your host, Charles Denyer, and tonight we step into the world of El Al Airlines, Israel's national carrier and the most secure airline in the world. An airline shaped by hijackings, bomb plots, and the reality that danger rarely announces itself. With this airline, security is not a promise. It's a hardened doctrine, shaped by the belief that survival is not a preference or a luxury, but an obligation, paid for in vigilance, suspicion, and with choices that most airlines will never make.
Welcome to Threat Level Red, a Charles Denyer Productions podcast. Every week, Charles brings his real-world expertise to the front lines of America's most pressing threats: cyber attacks, extremist networks, rogue states, terrorism, economic instability, systemic breakdowns, and so much more. From the digital battleground to the streets of America, no threat is left uncovered. No spin, no filters, just intel.
Ben Gurion Airport in Tel Aviv, Israel, is already awake. Long before dawn, before the departure boards flickered to life, even before passengers lined up with coffee in hand, the real work has already begun. A traveler steps forward. A question is asked, not by a machine, but by a human being trained to notice what others miss: tone, timing, hesitation, confidence, fear. There's no rush here, no apology for the delay, because this airline does not sell speed, it sells survival. For decades, El Al Israel Airlines has lived under a reality few airlines ever face: the certainty that someone, somewhere, is trying to bring one of its planes down. Hijackings, bomb plots, missile threats, assassination attempts. This is not theoretical risk. It is a lived experience for El Al. And because of this, El Al built something radically different. Not reactive security, not optics, but a system built on one reality: the threat is real and can strike anytime, anywhere, without warning. Reinforced cockpit doors long before 9/11, armed sky marshals before the term entered public vocabulary, layered intelligence, behavioral profiling, and aircraft defenses that acknowledge a brutal truth: technology alone does not stop human intent. But this success comes with controversy. Critics call it invasive, discriminatory, excessive. Supporters call it unmatched, necessary, and proven. So tonight, we dive into the world of El Al, an airline where security is not a feature, not a promise, but an uncompromising doctrine, and where protection is simply unrivaled. El Al didn't choose to become the world's most security-obsessed airline. It was born into that job. In September 1948, just months after Israel declared independence, an improvised aircraft carried President Chaim Weizmann from Geneva back to the newborn state, a flight born not of ceremony or comfort, but of urgency and survival. Aviation pressed into service as a matter of national necessity rather than commercial ambition. That journey became part of El Al Airlines' origin story, forging an identity in which security was never an afterthought or a feature to be added later, but the core assumption from the very beginning: a mindset shaped by threat, isolation, and the understanding that failure was never an option. Almost immediately, El Al learned what many airlines only learn later. In this region, aviation is not just transportation, it's politics at 30,000 feet. Fast forward to July 23, 1968. El Al Flight 426, a Boeing 707, flying from Rome to Tel Aviv, is hijacked by members of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, the PFLP, and the plane is diverted to Algiers, an event widely regarded as a milestone in the era of modern aviation terrorism. No one dies in that hijacking, but the message is unmistakable. El Al isn't just an airline. It flies with the knowledge that its very existence draws attention, scrutiny, and risk. And the pressure doesn't ease. Just months later, in December 1968, terrorists attack El Al Flight 253 during a stop in Athens, killing one person and injuring others. Now, stop and think about what this means for organizational psychology. When the threat is persistent, the normal, if you want to call normal, corporate response, policies, memos, compliance checklists, well, that starts to feel like bringing a clipboard to a gunfight. So El Al evolves differently. Instead of treating security as a checkpoint, they began treating security as a doctrine. Layered defenses, intelligence coordination, armed presence, and human screening. Because the adversary is human, and humans don't always trigger alarms. By 1969, the world catches a glimpse of what this looks like in practice when El Al Flight 432, a Boeing 720, en route from Amsterdam to Tel Aviv, made a routine stop at Zurich Airport. As the aircraft prepared for takeoff, 4 armed Palestinian militants from, once again, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine stormed the plane, opening fire at close range. The attack unfolded in seconds. Crew members were hit. One would later die from his wounds. The aircraft itself was riddled with bullets, left badly damaged on the tarmac. What would have become a mass casualty hijacking or mid-air destruction was unfolding in full view until it was stopped. An undercover Israeli security agent aboard the flight drew his weapon and returned fire, killing the lead attacker and halting the assault before the aircraft could leave the ground. The remaining attackers were subdued and arrested. So the significance of that moment cannot be overstated. This was not luck. It was doctrine in action, an early decisive example of El Al's security philosophy. Threats are assumed, force is authorized and will be used, and hesitation, well, that can cost lives. Now, here's where it gets uncomfortable, and therefore quite interesting. El Al's model grows out of a harsh assumption. Someone is always trying, which means passengers are not treated like anonymous cattle being processed through a metal detector. They're treated like variables in a threat equation, sometimes interviewed, sometimes scrutinized, sometimes delayed. Admirers call it the gold standard. Critics call it invasive and discriminatory. And while El Al's approach is widely described as highly effective, many of its operational details are not made public for obvious reasons. And that brings us to the core question. The one El Al forces every modern society to answer a simple question. If the threat is relentless, then how can you not build security around today's real-world realities? El Al's security system does not begin at the metal detector. It begins with a far more uncomfortable assumption. And what is that? That the threat is already in motion. This is the first mistake most people make when they think about airline security. They imagine checkpoints, scanners, and technology. El Al imagines intent. For El Al, security is not a moment, it is a continuum. Long before a passenger reaches the gate at Ben Gurion Airport, intelligence assessments, passenger data, and contextual threat analysis are already in play. According to multiple reports, El Al's model is built around layered human judgment supported by technology, not replaced by it. The most visible expression of this philosophy is the pre-check-in interview. Conducted by highly trained security officers, these are not random questions or casual conversations. They are structured, behavioral assessments designed to detect inconsistencies, stress responses, and anomalies. Not just what is said, but how, when, and why. Machines detect prohibited items. Humans detect deception. This is also where controversy begins. Critics, including civil liberties groups and international human rights organizations, argue that behavioral screening can slide into discriminatory profiling. Israeli courts and regulators have acknowledged these concerns while defending the system's intent-based focus. Supporters of El Al's approach, and I'm one of them, argue that this discomfort is not a flaw. It is the exact point. Behavioral screening is defended as risk-based, not identity-based, grounded in patterns, intelligence context, and real-world threat history rather than assumptions alone. Israeli courts and security officials have repeatedly emphasized that the goal is prevention, not prejudice, and that the system is continuously reviewed, trained, and refined precisely because the stakes are so high. In a domain where airline failure means mass casualties, proponents contend that prioritizing outcomes over optics is not only justified, it is absolutely essential. In their view, yes, civil liberties matter, but they matter most in a society that remains alive to actually defend them. With that said, moving on from the pre-check interview, El Al's security layers outward. Checked baggage is not merely scanned, it is controlled. El Al pioneered rigorous baggage reconciliation and was among the earliest civilian airlines to combine explosive detection systems with human oversight, a redundancy model repeatedly cited in FFA analysis as exceeding global minimum standards. And then there is the aircraft itself. Decades before 9/11 forced the issue worldwide, El Al installed reinforced cockpit doors, informed by its own hijacking history in the 1960s and 1970s. The airline also deploys armed sky marshals on flights, acknowledged publicly but deliberately invisible in practice. Their role is deterrence first, intervention last. And then there is the measure that truly sets El Al apart. Following attempted missile attacks on Israeli civilian aircraft in the early 2000s, El Al equipped parts of its fleet with anti-missile defense systems designed to counter heat-seeking shoulder-fired surface-to-air missiles, technology typically reserved for military aircraft. This decision, reported by the BBC and The Guardian, was costly, controversial, and unprecedented in commercial aviation, but for El Al, a necessity. But here's the outcome that anchors every argument that I want everyone to know. Despite being one of the most consistently targeted airlines in history, no successful terrorist attack has occurred on an El Al flight since 1968. You see, at the end of the day, El Al does not optimize for convenience. It optimizes for survival. Which brings us to the question no one likes to ask, but cannot avoid. If a system built on intelligence, human judgment, and friction works this well, why has the rest of the world simply chosen comfort over reality? So let's be honest. Security doctrines sound impressive on paper. They only earn legitimacy when they collide with reality. El Al's system has been tested repeatedly, not in simulations, but in moments where failure would have meant hundreds of lives cost. And those tests explain why this airline thinks the way it does. As discussed in the opening segment of this episode, the first major proof point came in 1969, just 1 year after the hijacking of El Al Flight 426 in 1968. At Zurich Airport, members of the PFLP launch a highly coordinated attack on an El Al aircraft preparing for departure, but again are unsuccessful thanks to an El Al Sky Marshal. Pause on that for a moment. This wasn't luck. This was doctrine in motion, and it worked. Now, fast forward to 1986, a pregnant Irish woman, Anne Murphy, unknowingly tries to carry explosive aboard an El Al flight from London to Tel Aviv, which were placed in her luggage by her fiancé, a terrorist operative. Here's the critical detail. El Al security officers flagged her during questioning, feeling something was off with her answers. And while the X-ray scanner showed nothing suspicious, her bag, nonetheless, was searched, and a bomb with 1.5 kilograms of Sentex explosives was discovered before takeoff. Bottom line, the system worked precisely as designed, detecting intent through human interaction, not machinery alone.
We've had a terrorist attack against Israelis in Africa, in Kenya. We know of, at the moment, of two dead children.
And then there are the attacks that never quite make headlines. Throughout the 1990s and early 2000s, Israeli intelligence repeatedly warns of plots targeting El Al aircraft abroad. Some never reach execution. Others are disrupted quietly, long before a passenger boards a plane. According to reporting by The Guardian and the RAND Corporation, El Al's close integration with national intelligence services allows it to operate several moves ahead of adversaries, disrupting plots in planning phases rather than reacting at checkpoints. Then again comes the missile era. As spoken about earlier, in 2002, a chartered Israeli aircraft narrowly escapes a shoulder-fired missile attack after takeoff from operated by El Al. The incident validates the fear Israeli planners had voiced for years. Civilian jets are vulnerable to military-grade weapons. El Al responds decisively, equipping parts of its fleet with anti-missile defense systems. A move confirmed by news outlets, and one that is still unmatched by any other major commercial airline in the world. And let's not forget, the absence of successful attacks does not mean the absence of attempts. It means prevention, often invisible, often uncomfortable, and often misunderstood. And that may be the most important lesson of all. El Al's security successes don't produce dramatic footage or viral moments. They produce nothing. No explosions, no funerals, no memorials. Just flights that take off and flights that land. So here's the question that should unsettle all of us. If the most effective security system in civilian aviation history is defined not by what happens, but by what doesn't happen, why do we continue to measure security by speed, convenience, and optics rather than outcomes? This is the part of the El Al story which admiration turns uneasy. Because the same system that has kept its aircraft safe for decades rests on a principle most democratic societies struggle to defend openly. And what is that? That not all risks look the same, and pretending it does can be dangerous. El Al's security model relies heavily on behavioral profiling, a practice that prioritizes intent, travel patterns, inconsistencies, and contextual intelligence over random screening. Supporters argue this is not racial profiling, rather risk-based assessment, and I couldn't agree more with El Al. However, critics still argue the distinction collapses in practice. Civil liberties organizations, including Human Rights Watch and the Association for Civil Rights in Israel, have documented cases in which Arab and Muslim passengers experience more intense questioning, delays, and secondary screening when flying El Al. Lawsuits and legal challenges, some successful, most not, have forced Israeli courts to confront a difficult balancing act between equality and security. Israeli authorities have acknowledged the tension while maintaining that intent-focused screening has saved lives. So after 9/11, many countries publicly rejected profiling while quietly adopting behavioral indicators under different names. The United States TSA introduced a program called SPOT, drawing heavily, though often unsuccessfully, from Israeli-inspired concepts. And why was it unsuccessful? Because simply copying El Al's playbook and their tactics without implementing the right security culture and training, well, that doesn't work. Unfortunately for the United States, we seem to care more about the optics than the outcome in terms of aviation security. As for El Al's profiling, make no mistake, it is deliberate and methodical, carried out by security officers trained extensively in psychology, interrogation techniques, and continuous assessment, taught not to rely on ethnicity alone, but to evaluate narratives, stress responses, and plausibility in real time. The psychological impact on passengers is real. However, many find it reassuring, preferring a few difficult questions to the unease of feeling unprotected at 35,000 feet. I know I would. Others undeniably feel singled out, and El Al accepts that cost openly. The airline has stated repeatedly, through both government and corporate voices, that it is willing to endure complaints if it means preventing funerals. And yet critics raise a counterpoint, one that I don't really agree with, and it is this. Normalizing profiling, well, that risks institutionalizing bias. It risks teaching societies to equate identity with threat, and once that line blurs, rolling it back is nearly impossible. This is the moral fault line, critics say. I, on the other hand, say this is the survival fault line that needs to be upheld for the sake of security for everyone on that plane. It's interesting because security professionals often say we can't protect everything. Well, El Al responds differently. We protect what we must. And the airline's record reflects that very effectiveness. So the real question isn't whether El Al's model works. Oh, it works. The real question is whether modern societies are willing to tolerate a system that openly admits perfect fairness and perfect security may never coexist. And that leads us directly into the next segment and part 2 of our examination of the world's most secure airliner. Because if El Al's approach is so highly effective, why has almost every other airline on Earth refused to adopt it? And how does El Al extend its security culture to airports thousands of miles away from Israel? That's next, so stay with us. Thanks for listening. I'm your host, Charles Denyer. This is Threat Level Red.
Threat Level Red is a Charles Denyer Productions podcast. For more information, visit charlesdenyer.com to learn more about current and upcoming podcasts and episodes, current and future book publications, professional services offered by Charles, and much more. All opinions expressed are those of the host and do not reflect the official positions of any government agency, military branch, or national security organization.